Good morning, dear friends, and welcome again to the ongoing talks that we have. Earlier, we had a very interesting talk from Hattie on her trip to Japan, which lasted
Mm.
2 sessions, and we was all enthralled. But today, another place which I've never been to before, but would like to one day. And this is on Cuba. Hattie.
Nice to see you, folks. I have got some slides to show and some facts and joy to give. I've been to Cuba about 5 times, I think. And when I was first of all going to go, I asked all my friends, did they have any connections in Cuba that I could make contact with? And one person, no, I was given a couple of doctors' names and I tried to email them. That was in 2005. But in fact, in 2005, they hardly had any internet access at all. There was something called the internal internet, and Cuba didn't allow external internet except for certain professions. And luckily, one of the doctors who I made contact with, she ran Info Med. So that means that she had internet connection internationally because she was collecting information about progress in medicine. And each day she had to put up the news about what was new in medicine for the Cuban doctor population. They didn't have access to anything else except through Infomed. So her boss used to tell her off if it hadn't been done the next day. And which is a bit sad, really. But then the internet connection is so wibbly wobbly that I suppose it did happen several times that it wasn't ready the same day. Anyway, I did make a connection there with a guy. So 50% success rate, and met up with him very briefly. I think we might have had a couple of hours meeting. And he introduced me to his wife as well. They didn't have any children at the time. And I've since then stayed in touch with his wife. And she has been to the UK, funded by myself, 4 times, I think, to the Royal College of GPs conferences. And we had some fun in Liverpool, seeing the Beatles Museum and stuff like that. She absolutely adored it. So let me just tell you a little bit about Cuba. As you know, it's one of the Caribbean islands. Can you just think of some other Caribbean islands? I mean, well, Barbados, Tobago. I just can't think of them when I want them. But, I think Cuba feels quite different. It feels like so much of a big country to me because it's internationally well, I think it's internationally famous because they supply doctors to all sorts of countries. They've helped Angola win their independence. They have I think they have a phenomenal reputation. I mean, the what's it called? Neonatal death rate is extremely low. I mean, it's comparable to Sweden, and yet they don't have medications and they don't have equipment. And the reason they don't have equipment is because of the US embargo, which has been since the 1990s. So here we are 30 odd years later, and there's no plant machinery. They really are amazingly resourceful. So the population is very stable, just over 11 million. And it was that when I first went in 2005, and it still is today. So that says something, I think, about their family planning. The whole government philosophy is to give everybody education and everybody free healthcare and free schooling. Yeah. And that involves primary, secondary, and university, and special schools like music and sport. There a very high percentage of people go to university. So it's normal. It's normal. Being allowed abroad is extremely difficult. So another person who I met in the UK, he was a sports journalist in Cuba. And for the 2012 Olympics, a little team of journalists came over with the Cuban Olympic team. And he looked at his visa and it said 6 months. And he thought, oh, well, I'll stay for 6 months then. Well, actually, the repercussions were absolutely dire. He's got a daughter and not very elderly parents, but anyway, parents. He's got a family over there. And what Cuba does is if you overstay their allowance, regardless of what the country says your visa is, if you overstay the Cuban government's allowance, then you're not allowed to come back. I think it's for 2 or 3 years at all. And so you become essentially a refugee here, even though you're still covered by your visa. Therefore, you should theoretically be able to work here, but you haven't got any connections or friends here. So you're just like a waif. And you haven't got any money, and you try for jobs and you're exploited in London and doing night shifts and trying to catch up on your sleep during the night so that you can, you can't pay for accommodation because you haven't got any money, etc. So it's extremely situational difficulties there. Right. So I went in 2005 with a company called Explore, and I can tell you what I think they are phenomenal. They use local guides. The guides took us places that nobody else would ever think of, like the cemetery, which is quite a meeting place for Cubans, actually, because they don't have the same kind of cut and dried approach to death as we do. It's much more common. People die when they're younger. I say it's much more common. Actually, it's not, because the health of Cubans is phenomenal. It matches lots of other European countries even, but they do take note of people who've died, and they go and see the graves and be there and chat and things. And it's a social place to go to, actually. So that was one of the things we did with them. I brought some Cuban money back at the time. These are pesos, 3 peso papers, and they still have the revolutionary picture of Che on it, which is fantastic. I mean, I think he was a very amazing person. In 1959, the revolution did succeed in kicking out Batista. Batista was a puppet for the United States. And before 1959, the country was like a backdoor brothel, very popular, as they say, splendid prostitution. Education was rubbish, healthcare was rubbish, and the United States just regarded it as a nice holiday place to go to. Many people did anyway. And poverty was rife. And the following for Castro and Che was phenomenal, because really they didn't have a life. It was just kowtowing to the United States the whole time. So jumping around, that is. Let me just go and see if I can share my screen. My screen, well, first of all, I think I need to... Now, if I press share screen, that might work. Oh, I haven't got share screen. I can't even see you on Zoom. Right, let's try share screen now. You can see all my whole thing. Select a window I want to share. All right. Now, am I sharing a picture of what are called mogotes?
Yes, great.
Okay, right. Cuba, geographically, is these hills you can see are white. That's because they're made of coral, and the the way that the geology has gone in Cuba is that enormous caves formed of coral rose up out of the sea and became huge caves, and the roof could no longer survive, so they collapsed. And what's left are these mogotes at the side. And that can you see my arrow?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That might be one side and that might be the other, but they're actually extremely steep, and not much vegetation grows on the sides where they've collapsed, and they've got lots of stalactites. And there are some caves on Cuba still which haven't collapsed because they're smaller, and they can use them. They've got very good acoustics. They can use them for concerts and social places. So this is going out of Havana, going southwest. I don't know if you can think of the shape of Cuba. I don't know what it's like. Oh, this is no good. You can't see it. You can only see the slide. But going southwest from Havana. Havana is on the north coast of Cuba, about 2/3 from the right-hand end. And this area here where these mogotes are, and these wonderful valleys here, very, very fertile from the ground, they are southwest. So let me see if I can get the next slide up. How do I get the next slide in my show? Can you still see my screen?
Yes. Yeah.
Ah, right. Well, Hattie, who I had made connections with, this doctor, she had some friends who lived in a place called Viñales, and I went to stay with them.
Hattie, we're still seeing the first picture. It hasn't moved on.
It has not moved on.
Oh, sorry. I thought you. Yeah, my mistake, Hattie. I didn't realise you meant the next screen. Sorry. Next picture. I mean.
Okay, try this one.
Yes. Well, that's you on the balcony.
That's the bike.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So I went to see Patrick's friends. Now, this house looks in incredibly good order. It's probably because it costs quite a bit to stay in. Now, Cuba has two currencies, the local currency and the CUC, C-U-C. That's the Cuban convertible. The local currency is pesos, and 1 peso is said to equal 1 CUC. Well, it really doesn't in what it buys. So this bike cost 10 CUC per day to rent. And considering that the pay in Cuba is said to be no one gets more than 3 times the wage as anybody else. Doctor's wage is about 29 to 30 CUC per month. So that is incredibly low, according to us. But they get free housing. They don't get free food. They get ration books. But they have free housing, free education, supposedly free creche care, though that is being squeezed, and education. Transport is incredibly cheap. So the 1 peso, which is supposed to be equivalent to a CUC, that is divided into 100 centavos. So your transport might cost you 5 or 10 centavos if you are Cuban local. But for me, it will, I mean, for a start, I wouldn't be really able to get on a bus. There are not many of them, but I wouldn't be, it would be extremely frowned upon if I got on a bus. They'd say, get off and take a taxi. And they do, they speak up. They know how rich we are. Anyhow, so they make quite a lot of money from tourism such that they can maintain their houses well. I loved being on the bike, and as soon as I could the next day, I got out and I cycled to this reservoir. This reservoir looks as though it's flooded, but actually it's not. It's incredibly low. And there were dead fish on the side. And it was very, very hot over Christmas time when I went. And I think that there was too little oxygen and it was too hot for the fish and they died. But it was a very lovely cycle ride. And that evening was the sunset. Beautiful sunsets, mostly beautiful sunsets nearly every day. There's the detail of a mogote. So the trees only managed to grow up so far, mostly from the ground. And you can see the effect of the stalactites making these wonderful shadows. It's all coral, limestone origin, well, limestone, alkaline. This is a tobacco growing area in Viñales, and that's a tobacco drying shed. Now I've got to go and find my next email in order to show you the next slide. What do I do? Do I stop sharing for a mo? Go to my folder, get here, get to the next, because I could only send 6 photos at a time to my now go to Zoom, now share it. Oh, is that it? Can you see a man with a fish?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
All right. Okay. So the next day I suffered from jet lag terribly badly because the day was far too long for me. And I wrote rubbish in my diary twice. It was extraordinary. But the next day I decided to cycle to the coast and see what was there. Bumped into 4 Czechoslovakians and we cycled together down to the port. That was about 26k. But most of Cuba is relatively speaking quite low and not mountainous. There is an area of mountains at another area. So this guy had caught a marlin, a baby marlin, off the port. The port was very nice, except for the amazing amount of plastic along the edge of the sea, which nobody bothered to pick up. I mean, maybe they would have if there was going to be an event or a great tourist influx or something. But I had a swim in the sea, and the Czechs and I, we just watched each other's belongings and dived in. It was fabulous. And then on the way back, which was mostly uphill, I developed pain behind my left knee, and I couldn't keep up with them going back to Viñales. There's no way you can get lost on. There's hardly any roads, and it's much because of the US embargo. This photograph of the horse. Most transport is local, horse-drawn. Very rarely see lorries. Well, again, I can't talk for now, but I mean, there really were not very many lorries, and most transport of fruit and veg and things between towns were done by horse and cart or by the military, who do have vehicles. So they are very inventive about making the tack for the horses and make it decorative, and so that there wasn't very much leather left in that halter. Vehicles are used until they absolutely fall apart. So you can see the Chevy here parked outside a hotel, and they really are genuinely, pre-1990s, and they still take care to look after them and make them go somehow. This horse and trap very often seen in the countryside for tourists. Because tourism makes so much money per tourist that you encounter, they really are popular. This is called an anole, and there are so many different colours and kinds there. I love nature in Cuba, very, very varied and interesting, but this particular trip I didn't look at very much. And these seeds, can you see the way that they've stained that guy's thumb? they are very red staining. And I've written here, useful for the Tainos, I guess. Tainos were original Cubans who lived there before the Spanish discovered Cuba. And they obviously painted themselves with different colours. So that's why I've commented about the red colour for the Tainos. Maybe they still use this kind of red colouring in Cuba because of lack of imports. Most of the churches, and there are churches in every town, even though it's declared a communist country, town square, in a la Spanish style, really. And also what's always in the town centre is a memorial to Jose Marti. And Jose Marti was a revolution in the 1800s, and he, even age 15, he was deported by the then government because of his revolutionary ideas. But he was also a poet and wrote articles, and very often, well, round the bottom of this memorial, you will find quotes from his poetry and his writings, which are very inspirational, actually, very lovely. And he did write poetry about romance and about relationships, and people love that. So that's a very nice, I think it's quite nice, but he's very revered. I keep forgetting what I've got to do next. Got to get back to my folders. I've got to go back to the main folder. I've got to go to number 3. I've got to go to this. Then I've got to go to Zoom and tell it that I want to share that. And I want to share, oh, right, sorry a minute. I haven't opened it apparently. This one. No, I've done that. Why didn't it move on? Share screen now, and I choose that one. Can you see a lady with food?
Yes, great.
So this is Ileana, who I was staying with, and she always fed me far too much. That's just for me, all alone. And I could stash it in my sandwich box and take it out on the bike the next day. It was fantastic. And I noticed from my diary that I was rereading last night, I had lobster 4 times there, because they think that lobster, and lobster is very much a class symbol there, because if you can afford lobster from the local fishermen, because they've got to run boats with engines, they definitely have a lot of money from tourists who buy the lobster. So that's what I did have 4 times while I stayed there. This is the morning, and I just loved it. You see, the mist is like the Lake District, where it's all gathered in the lower valley, and the trees are popping up between the misty areas. I really enjoyed going out in the mornings. Right, I'm going to stop sharing again and get to the next block of email pictures. Okay, number 4. I want that one. I want to go to Zoom. I want to tell you what I want to share. No, hang on a minute. Where's the share screen? I forget between times what it is I want to. Can you see a picture? Oh no, that's the last one I should.
No. Share screen on mine is at the bottom, but they're not the same on everybody's.
It is at the bottom when it offers it to me, but it's not offering it to me at the moment. Right. If I go to Zoom now, Oh, it's not letting me go to Zoom. Why is that then? Oh, there is Zoom. So if I go to here, what's this? Okay. Now I go into slide 4. I go here. I go to Zoom. I go to share screen and I choose this. Can you see a picture of houses?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So this shows you the row of houses I was staying in, and they all look well maintained and painted. And that's because they're all letting out rooms. It's called a casa privada, so it's a private home, and they're all letting out rooms to tourists. It's largely through personal connections, because you can't really search the internet very easily, or you couldn't then search it for private properties. They've all got to be registered with the tourist board locally. They have to be inspected. They're very high standards, and they've got to have belongings there for you. So they've got to have a shower, they've got to have soap and shampoo and food for you, and a fan that works. The electricity, okay, they do have power cuts, but not very frequently. So let me see if I can get to the next. Here's the arrow. Yeah. So come the evening time, what was I supposed to do? Well, they have Casa de la Musica, so that's music houses, and Casa del Teatro, so theatre houses. So this is the music centre. And it cost me 1 cook to get into, but it costs locals 1 peso, which effectively is effectively, in terms of what you can buy, is about 1/5 of a cook. And this is the kind of artwork that they do. And I mean, I'm generalizing, but I really find the artwork in Cuba very fun and lovely. So that was and then off I went and danced rumba, salsa, whatever. I loved it. Always live music, never electronic. Why? They don't have the electronics. So nearly everybody in Cuba plays some kind of musical instrument. They haven't got anywhere to practice. They haven't got records, CDs. They may have now, especially the richer ones. So, and I only once in my entire trips saw a piece of printed music. There was Holguin, which is in the east of the country, is a place I went to when I first went there. And we were shown, well, not actually shown it, but in the back of the pub area, the kind of one of the pub things, there was a kind of organ, and they had paper feeds to it. So somebody must have imported that from Europe years ago. And that's the only place where I saw a piece of printed music. And I'm not talking about the scrolls. They had holes in, but for some reason in that same place, I found a piece of printed music. But everybody learns the tunes by heart. They sing by heart. I guess everybody's taught in school. Anyway, let's talk about agriculture a bit, because Viñales is such an agricultural place, and it's a national park. Now, there are rules about farming in the national park. You cannot have tractors. This tractor is an extremely well maintained and painted tractor in 2015. So that person was lucky, and they clearly were not farming in the national park. In the national park, you have to use bulls to pull things. You use sleds because it's so muddy that you can't really make much use of carts except on tracks and roads. So that's why the tourists have the carts. You need to be able to cope with mud. So there are the bulls. Sorry, I flipped over them a bit, didn't I? In the meantime, that's the side of a mogote. And for goodness sake, Cuban government's allowed somebody to do a massive mural there, which is representing the history of life on Earth. So it starts, I can't see where it is, but it starts with sort of snails and underwater creatures, sea creatures, and then it moves to the dinosaurs, and then it moves to humans. I mean, it was tasteless to me, but anyway, they take you there to have a look at it and show it off. But here's a guy with his hat and his stick and his bulls, and you can see how muddy it gets where they go. So it's quite useful. Now, the thing is, you can't see the cart behind him, but I say cart, it's not a cart, it's a sled. Oh, you can just see it under the back leg of the bull here. That is a sled, and it's like a V shape, so it's narrow at the front. And let's see what else. Here is a spider, absolutely amazing creature with, you know, spikes and colors, and I don't know. The guy was standing behind it. He showed me it. I didn't spot it. But this is Julian, and he gave me a walk around, nature walk, which was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. So let's see if I can go to the next, number 5. Now, at what point do I go back to screen share? Why is it giving me the old picture? I thought I'd stopped screen sharing. I have stopped screen sharing, haven't I?
I think so.
Yeah. So in which order do I have to do this? And now I go back to Zoom, and now I go to screen share and go back to that. Is this a butterfly?
Oh, wow. Yes.
Yeah. That's not a very good picture. But the point is that the butterflies and moths are large, and they chime in so well with the environment that they're quite difficult to see. So this has landed on a green leaf. Another photograph I took was a butterfly which was more sort of browny yellow, like a fritillary, and that had landed on the mud. So they are very well disguised. This is a bus, and one horse is pulling 8 people plus the driver. There's at least 8 people in there. There may be children that we can't see. That's the sort of transport that everybody uses. You can see the person in the back seems to be looking at her mobile phone. Horses are very slim but fit. They are reasonably well kept, and they can live up to 20 years, they say. So it's really important about horses and bulls. I met one farmer, and his bulls had died of old age, and he was just waiting. He couldn't farm without his bulls. He was just waiting for the government to give him another bull. And because there's so little private enterprise, he couldn't go and buy one, especially since he had no money. And he lived in the countryside. So he was just living at home on what he could get out of his garden and the local produce, and what is supplied on the ration books. And the ration books are rice, sugar, beans, soap. That's bars of soap, not plastic bottles of washing up liquid. Salt, eggs, coffee, etc. And rations are per person and for children as well. And you can, well, basically, if you don't like coffee, you will either swap your coffee for something or sell it on the black market, because people want coffee. Some people like it, and then they can use it to sell to tourists, so they can make money out of it. I even went to a cafe once which had no coffee because they'd run out. So it's quite an economy when there's so little money circulating. Very interesting.
Mm.
So this was on the bus stop on the way back to Havana. Lovely lake and just a place. Now the sad thing is, of course, in these places now where the buses stop and the tourists are coming and going, there's plastic bottles of Fanta and Coke and stuff like that, which I just find, well, I find it extremely sad. But of course, they think that it's progress and that's what they want, because that's what tourists want. It's such a muddle. So I got back to Havana to Patri and her couple of children, and she's called Gabby, and she's quite a star. That's a picture that she had done, and she did a selfie for that picture. So she was already learning to use the camera for a selfie. I was on cameras, not on mobiles. One day, Patri had a friend who had a car, so he said he'd make himself available for us to do some out of Havana trips. And we went to Ernest Hemingway's finca, that's the farm where he lived, which was quite nice. But again, it was like the house of somebody who was very rich, and his boat was there. So we had a look round, and the kids had fun running up and down the steps and things like that. So that was one of our outings together. Here's another piece of artwork. And as I said, I like the Cuban art. This is at the docks, Havana docks. Not many ships in, very uncommon to see cruise ships coming to Cuba, again, because of the embargo. The embargo now it's been extended and extended. So now the US even say that they're not going to do trade with countries that do trade with Cuba. So it's like a secondary impact. So often countries don't want to do trade with Cuba because they say that then they can't do trade with the USA. And the USA supposedly doesn't do trade with Cuba, but in fact, 6.6% of imports in Cuba are from the United States. So some people are finding ways round, or they're just risking being told off by the US government and sanctioned. The biggest trader with Cuba is actually Europe. I don't know why. Sorry, I'm getting back to history, but there you go. So this is kind of an evening scene where people are always outdoors, and outdoor living is extremely common, especially when it's so hot. And in the evenings and first thing in the morning, that's the nice time to go out. For some reason, I have to do that.
Hattie, when was this trip?
Pardon?
When was this trip?
This trip that I'm talking about now is 2015, and I first went in 2005. So it was my third trip to Cuba, this one. And what I did notice was the maintenance. Oh, sorry, you can't see this slide yet. The maintenance of houses had improved by this time. I mean, they were really absolutely dilapidated in the city centre when I first went in 2005. It's very humid in the nights. It gets very cold, and the dew and dampness makes clothes actually wetter in the morning than you made them in the evening. Say you did your laundry at night and hung it up to dry overnight. Oh no, it doesn't dry overnight. It gets wetter because of the dew. But then as soon as it's in the sun during the day, then it's dry in an hour or two. So very interesting weather there, but it makes for a lot of mold. So this is one of the streets in the old town in Havana. I liked walking around there. I love the food, I love the coffee, I like just chatting to people. In the middle, to the left of next to the person who's dressed in black with a black rucksack, you can see a three-wheeler, like a rickshaw, really. So that's available for people to hire, and they'll take you anywhere for a price. And of course, you have to, as a tourist, pay in cooks, but the local people pay in pesos. That blue car is quite a modern car.
Looks like a 2CV.
Maybe. I didn't notice. This is a tuk-tuk taxi, and you can get 3 adults in there plus the driver. You could put a kid on the floor if they were prepared to sort of hold their knees. And this is again in the port, and lo and behold, there was a boat. I think the boat was some kind of military. It didn't look like a cruise ship, really. You would imagine that individual rich people would come there in their cruisers, but in fact, really, there was hardly any movement in the port. And I mean, look how few cranes there are for unloading ships. Very few. It was kind of sad to see, really. This house was much better maintained than when I saw it in 2005. And that's Patri, and that's her mum. So that's where Patri was brought up, which is a well-off part of Cuba. In fact, they have ice cream parlors there, for goodness sake, called Pinocchio. And there's a park there called John Lennon Park, because they revere the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and things. This is upstairs in Patri's house. Patri's house is in a kind of mediumly well-off area in Havana, with bus connections for pretty good. Internet connections, you have to go to Internet Square. So really, there's so little internet that people had to crowd over there to get their mobile phones to work. And that is intranet I'm talking about, not international internet, intranet, to get their mobile phones to work. And so you go along the pavement and you go down an alleyway alongside a house, and her place where she lives is at the back of the house, which she says has advantages because it's cooler. And this is like upstairs on the roof, but it's got a cover, so it's a covered room.
So you brought your toys with you then, Hattie?
Ah, well, this was from one of Patri's visits. She brought these toys for her son from England. They don't really have them there. So you're right to comment on the toys, because Felix, who you haven't met yet, her son, Patri's son, he just absolutely loved playing with these and dinosaurs and things like that. So we had, and he was great. He was a bit older than Gabby. So he was about, I think, first year secondary school. And he and I did English lessons. So he did Spanish lessons. So he was teaching me Spanish. And I went through a whole little book, which was about phrases in Spanish. And we had some laughter about that. But he was absolutely great and very much playing as a child, even though he was able to teach me as an adult, which I thought was great. I didn't mind that at all. Okay. I think you could ask me questions and interrupt, because, you know, things like the politics and the pay and going to university and the resistance movement, because there's definite criticisms of the government. And I mean, when Patri wanted to come to the UK, my God, getting permission was absolutely dire. You had to understand the system. very, very kind of communistic. I mean, first of all, she said to her boss that she would like to come to England such and such a date. And the boss said, well, you can't because I'm going to be away. And actually, Patry realised that it didn't matter two hoots whether they were both away at the same time. So she decided to go and see the Minister of Health. So she did. And the Minister of Health stamped her pass to let her go abroad. And that was the day before the flight that I had paid for her to come. And so she knew that she just had to get a wiggle on and go straight to the Ministry of Health. And it was so funny because she saw her boss at the airport, and her boss looked at her and said, "How come you're here?" So clever Patry had overruled her boss, was going in a flight to England. Anyway, yet another example of art. This is, I think it's lit up probably at the back, and they've got several museums. This one is a museum of modern art, so the contemporary artists are represented, and I think this must be made with all sorts of plastic objects. I don't know. Anyway, I can't remember. By Garcia Marquez y Posada. Now, I don't know if you know about the surnames in Spanish. The surname, Garcia is the first name, Marquez and Posada are both surnames, and the child takes the name of their father and their mother as surnames. So I guess you decide at some point, because you don't normally address somebody by both their surnames, but they definitely have both their surnames for official purposes and when you're first introduced to them. And then I don't know if they choose which surname to use afterwards. I'm not sure. But Patry is called Patry Sanso de... I've completely forgotten it. I had remembered it a second ago, but I've forgotten it now.
But then
Anyway, their children will take the family name. It's complicated, isn't it? Patry's children are called Sanso de Soberat. So their children are using the surname Sanso, which is their dad's family name. But actually, Cuban fathers have no legal obligation to look after their children. So Felix, who is, well, Dr. Felix, who was the first doctor that I contacted and was married to Patry, he got some connection in North America, and he lives in North America now, and he has nothing to do with the children except the odd internet call, and he sends no money to help Patry look after them at all, and she does 3 jobs in order to sustain them, and that requires the support of her mother and also the creches, especially for Gabby. The creches have shifted their hours, so she therefore has to leave her most high-earning job at Infomed. She has to leave there earlier in order to pick up Gabby from the creche, which is closing earlier. So pressures like that on life are happening because of modernization, I suppose. I don't know. Or the government doesn't. I should think people don't want to do the work. If they can work in tourism, they probably don't want to do that work of running the creche. So life was hard. And while I was there, which was only, I think I was there for a couple of weeks or maybe a bit more. While I was there, the microwave broke, so she had to get that fixed. The shelves needed fixing up because relatively new house. The shower in her house didn't work at first, and then she got it connected to the electrics, and we had a power cut. But the shower did work towards the end of my stay. Near the beginning of the stay, she had to heat up water on the gas cooker, which is like gas cylinders like we used to use,
Mm.
and heat up some water, and then we would use a jug to shower ourselves with of the warm water. And that was pretty good going. I mean, she was well off compared to a lot of people because of her main salary, which was InfoMed. But the other two jobs, I can't remember what. But the Casa de las Americas is quite interesting. They do have this monthly program with talks and films and music at the museum. Other museums are Museum of the Revolution and Museum of Decorative Arts. I don't know what I've done here. What have I done? Gone out of sharing somehow. Oh, what have I done?
Hattie, do you think they will develop solar power? Because that would
I
seem
can't
to be-
hear you, Ray.
Would they develop solar power? Because that would seem to be the big thing which could improve
Okay.
life.
I think David will tell us what metals are required for solar power, but they wouldn't get them. I mean, you know, how could they make a solar panel?
Yeah, you need some quite advanced industrial capability,
Yeah.
making silicon chips and all that. Maybe they could import them, trade or something. No reason why not.
Yeah, the difficulty is what they're going to export in exchange for the trade. They don't export very much. Rum, cigars, sugar. They haven't got masses to export. They have to import bitumen for the roads. And I watched roads being mended, huge potholes all over the place. I mean, taxi drivers just swerve this side or that side of the road to avoid potholes. But when a pothole's mended, I watched the workers fill it. They got soil from the side of the road and they mixed it with the gravel and the bitumen. And I thought to myself, well, that won't last a season. They haven't got the materials to even do road building. They have got more metal than they had in 2005, because in 2005, there were virtually no road signs. The traffic lights in Havana were round the central square. There were no other traffic lights. When I went in 2015, there were road signs and there were traffic lights. If there was a huge pothole or the side of the road had fallen away, they call them motorways because the motorways are the main roads along the island. If the side of the road had fallen away, for instance, somebody would get some bamboos, stick them in round the edge of the pothole and put a red string or an orange ribbon or whatever they could find around the bamboos just to indicate that there was a major, collapse of the road there. So as a driver, you did have to keep your eyes pretty well skinned. And all safety and security measures in Cuba are really about you looking after yourself. So one time I went up a ladder to see something and I noted in my diary that I had to avoid the nails. Stuff like that. Everything, there's no, at the Malecon, there's no railings or fencing to stop. The Malecon is the edge of the harbour. I'll get you there in a minute, but there's no railings. Anyhow, so I walked around town in Havana quite a lot to entertain myself, and I thought, well, I'll go and find the synagogue then, and that's the synagogue. And I decided to go in. It said it was open.
I'm not seeing the picture at the moment.
You're not seeing the picture now.
No, not.
We may not have seen a pothole either. I don't know if you showed a picture of a pothole. There you go.
Your screen share is loading.
Okay, we see a synagogue. We see a building.
Is that okay now?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So I went into the synagogue, and this guy got up off his bench and came to talk to me. There were no other tourists there at all. And he introduced himself, and there was an exhibition in the foyer, and he explained what the exhibition was about. And then at some point in time, I said, can I go inside and see? And he said, well, no, it's being used for dance rehearsal today. I thought you were one of the tourists to see the dance rehearsal. I said, oh, no, I'm just individual. Anyhow, the inside of the synagogue was being used for rehearsal space for a new dance company called Malpaso. Now, to me, that's a funny name for a dance company. Mal means bad, paso means step. Malpaso, anyway. It had obviously got international connections with the tourist trade, and a bunch of mostly North American tourists came on a coach. And so before they were come, this guy showing me about the Holocaust exhibition and how Cuba connected with Jews, and many Jews did arrive in Cuba for safety. He introduced me to the director of the dance company, which of course I was thrilled by because I love modern dance. And then I got treated to a performance with all the other tourists. I mean, just absolutely highlight of my holiday. They were superb dancers. And even though there wasn't a set to speak of, you can see the bottom picture, they had like a block there because that was a rock that he was going to sit on in a valley or something. But even so, you got the impression, and they had no costumes at the time, but they were really high standard dancers, and they are. In Cuba, if you study dance, you study all kinds of dance, everything. You can teach folk dancing, you can teach Latin American, you can teach ballet. The people who are trained in Cuban dance schools learn everything, all dance. So, and presumably the same with singing. Sorry?
Sorry, I just said great.
And presumably with singing, that they would all learn opera, folk singing, singing pop, singing for salsa and rumba. Amazing. So this is the fold-out poster that I was given about the Holocaust and how the Jews connected with the Cubans. I mean, there was a very, very sad case where a shipment, that's a bad term, sorry, a ship carrying a lot of Jews from Europe came over to Cuba, and Cuba would not allow them to disembark. And they stayed on that ship for days. And then I think it had to leave Cuba and go and dock somewhere else. It's called the St. Louis, and or St. Louis, and it's a very, very sad story because people died on there of dehydration and starvation. A dreadful, dreadful story. But a lot of Cubans did, Cuba did accept Jews. Their philosophy was to welcome open-hearted people from different countries. And in fact, Jews were quite influential in the running of Cuba, such that, for instance, when the revolution happened, and it was a socialist communist revolution, and they banned religions, oh, lo and behold, the Jews could have their synagogues and be open there. And when there was and in other ways, they were allowed to have their needs for their Jewishness and religious and beliefs met because they were influential with the Cuban government. So they worked in tandem. And I mean, Santería is another kind of religion, and that was also banned by the communist government. But you do see people who carry out their religious rituals in Santería. There's houses which are beautifully decorated, and they believe in and worship their gods of different kinds. mostly it's an African origin religion. Dance is very well respected in Cuba. For instance, that poster about the revolution is invincible, and they still talk about the revolution as if it's going on now. And of course, in a way it is, because the revolution is against capitalism. And it's about their survival, because they are so limited limited by the embargo. They are struggling to survive. They claim that Cuba is the most democratic country in the world because of their voting processes, because anybody can stand for the local CDR, which is I think it's called CDR. Anyway, the committees of the Republic, sorry, I don't know that very well. But anybody can stand for political posts locally, and everybody is expected to vote, and you are not exactly dragged out of your house to vote, but you would be expected to vote. And if you hadn't turned up, somebody would come and find you. How do they come and find you? Well, in Cuba, groups of about 20 houses, that may be between 40 and 100 people, are allocated to zones. And the zone people meet once a month to see what problems are locally and try and iron them out. So the kind of local politics people have to be involved with. If you're not, then they'll come and get you to meetings. So somebody from the house has to go. Not everybody from the house has to attend, but somebody from the house has to go. Oh dear. A minute. I haven't got that, have I?
I like that idea.
Yeah.
Trying to find the photos. Says it's busy.
I'm going to have to go in a minute.
So I can.
Hattie, would it be a good idea if we drew to a close and
right.
return next month? Would that be a possibility?
Oh yeah.
Because that would be, you know, a couple of people have got to go, and it would be. I don't want to lose anything. It's so very, very interesting, unfolding, actually.
I'll just show you what Patri gave me. She gave me this necklace, and the see-through beads are plastic. The pink ones are seeds. The purple ones are bits of shell, which have been cut square and painted with nail varnish. And it's on string. I mean, they're very creative. I bought a dress there and stuff like that. I mean, the catch for this necklace is made of a bit of metal, just a wire and a loop. So they have that. Anyway, yeah, I can on and on.
As I probably said earlier, fascinating time will be had by all, and I think my friends would agree with you on that. Yes, so as Patsy says, we would love to continue this next month if you are free.
I'll visit you to the posh part of Havana then.
Okay. Well, that's again, thank you very much, Hattie. It was interesting indeed.
When we come to part 2, I may have some questions.
Okay. That's a good time to have them. Right. Well, thank you, friends. And it's nice to see you again. And we will no doubt see some of you, hopefully, and he says, struggling away here to find that. Ah, yes. Next week, we have the inimitable David Saunders, who will be regaling us once again with his interesting title, Solar Going Ballistic in Bristol. We wait with interest, David. And so, further, old friends, have a good weekend. And I will see you soon.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
really enjoyed preparing for it, talking to you.
Thanks, Hattie.
Thanks so much. Thank you.